We are PYM. Aren't you proud? I really tried to touch, talk, connect with each and every one of you because I wanted to give you contagious of enthusiasm and excitement and all that running up and down my body. And particularly the children. I always make time to touch, ask them how they're doing, because that's our future. And also the elders. Charles Peterson, the oldest one at 96, is here. And then our personal friend. And the youngest one is two. There we go. There we go. Look at the baby. Isn't this a wonderful time, y'all? Can I have a bigger yes? Yes! I just want y'all to get all excited because I have the great honor. I even got dressed up for y'all. Yes. That I'm so excited. Tonya Thames Taylor is a personal friend. I had to back it up. Dr. Tonya Thames Taylor. We didn't know each other, and she heard about my troubles in life, and she reached out, and she came to see about me. You know that song, Come See About Me? And then my spiritual family on the 12th of this month came to see about me. This is such a wonderful thing right here, y'all. I'm just looking at every smiling face. Look at all these beautiful people here. Okay, Dr. Tonya Thames Taylor is the founding director of the African American Study Program at Westchester University, where she is also an associate professor of history. And y'all can read the rest, because I want her to get up here and shine. Thank you. Thank you. Hold up. Hey, baby. This is for you. This is for you.
You know that's special. Oh my goodness, thank you so very much. So thank you so much. And what I'm going to do is I just think that's so warm, and I'm so appreciative of that. And like Ava said, when you're up here and you see all these beautiful faces, you go, yes. Good evening. Before I get started, I would like to thank the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting for inviting me to do this keynote address. The keynote address that I've entitled this keynote address, I Go to Prepare a Place for You. An epistle in the manual of resistance for the poor, disfranchised, and the disinherited. So let me read the keynote title and address again, which is I Go to Prepare a Place for You. An epistle in the manual of resistance for the poor, disfranchised, and disinherited. The title comes from two places. One, the great storyteller and the centering bedrock of Christianity, Jesus, who in John 14:2-3, he provided comfort to his disciples when he says, "My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I was going to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come back and take you with me, and you can also be where I am." That is so beautiful to me, because you have a Savior in the faith of Christianity, the Savior saying that he wants to be around folks who he loves. And the title also comes from the deathbed words allegedly murmured by African American abolitionist, nurse, and organizer Harriet Tubman. So the story goes, because in history it's always so the story goes. So the story goes, she was on her deathbed and she said, "I go to prepare a place for you." I want you to picture an elderly black woman lying in her deathbed, thinking how she will continue to give service in what she believed to be her next journey in a living existence. Isn't that just swell? She's not thinking about drinking milk and honey. She's talking about providing a legacy so everyone can enjoy, and she can be there to enjoy it with them. So the title comes from Jesus and Harriet. As the title will reveal and is later developed, it's also about creating legacy and not spectacle. Creating legacy and not spectacle. The thesis of this talk is that transformation is dangerous. Transformation is subversive. Transformation is dangerous and transformation is subversive. I will use the story of African Americans along with other narratives that I admire to make the point. The subtitle, which is an epistle, which is a letter, in the Manual of Resistance for the Poor, Disfranchised, and Disinherited, is my humble way, my humble contribution to the letters by mystics, Quakers, poets, artists, Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, atheists, LGBTQIA, all hues, all kinds, anyone who have been receptive to organizing human beings and helping them to stay fully awake and active in a peaceful, loving, full focus struggle for justice. And justice looks like at any given time, at any different place, in any given context, looks different. This talk is not prescriptive because as I develop my points in conversations, you will see that I believe that life is too complex to create in 1, 2, 3 plan of action. Because when you get into 1, 2, 3 plans of actions, what you will find is that 2 may become before 1, 1 may become before 3, and the like sort. It all depends on the context of what is going on. Again, it's an honor. It is an honor to be here in this place, and I thank you. While I'm physically alone here at this podium, there are many with me. My mentor, my surrogate father, who was an historian, a descendant of Lucretia Mott, and fellow Quaker, Dr. Winthrop Donaldson Jordan, and his partner, my second mom, an attorney, Quaker, Cora Jordan. If they were still alive, they would be sitting right here in this front row, smiling and hoping that I stay true to my witness. In our lives together, they joyously encouraged, and I am forever grateful. I'm thankful for the planning committee, particularly Carter Nash, Avis Wanda McClinton, Tricia Kosa, Emily Blank, and our clerk, Penny Coughlin Davis, our General Secretary, Christy Duncan Teschner, and all of those on the planning committee. I don't know your name, but I felt your presence when I was talking to Avis and developing this talk. And I thank you for trusting me to come and speak before friends. See, I recognize that it is an honor to address lights of God. and I don't take that lightly. I understand that the goal is to, as the Holy Bible says, encourage one another. I'm here thinking about two women. One was Maria W. Stewart, and the other one was Grace Bastille Douglas. I think of Stewart, who died in 1880. She was an African-American domestic servant who became a teacher, a journalist, a lecturer, an abolitionist, and a woman rights activist. She's considered to be the first the first woman to speak in front of a mixed audience of men and women, black and white. She's also the first African-American woman to make public lectures about women's rights, social justice, and anti-slavery. My favorite essay by her that inspires me, she was speaking to the New England Anti-Slavery Society, and she had the audacity to name her essay, "Why Sit Here and Die?" And she was trying to get people to think. And another woman is Grace Bastille Douglas, who was an African-American mother, abolitionist, hat maker, teacher, and founding member of the biracial Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. She was assigned a seat in Quaker meeting houses, but her courage inspires me because she listened to the Spirit of God and not the voices of those around her. Both of these women refused to conform to these expectations that were around them, and they embodied in what they considered to be their Lord. They embodied the spirit of my talk tonight. And the talk tonight is basically going to focus on a part of Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. What a lovely vision when you think of it. In the spectacle world we live in, where folks value cars over human causes, violence over love, materialism over substance, and selfies over selflessness. I want to send out a shout to those friends, attenders, and allies who conceived and conducted workshops. They conducted worship sharing groups. They sung us to higher places. They made poster boards, handled the social media, and provided a willingness to be present at the tables. I thank Friends, the Friends Journal, and their labor, because some of this presentation has been shaped by the letters that I've seen come to the Friends Journal. And I would like to thank Pendle Hill pamphlets, because they are great. And I just like reading them. Thank you, Stephen Chase. You will hear yourself indirectly in this presentation on your pamphlet on Martin Luther King. Thank you. This talk is not conforming to the world. We're not conforming to the world. We're Twitter followers, Facebook likes, viral videos, if it's possible. You know, we're not basically conforming to that element of the world. So what I would like for us to do is to go back in Quaker fashion. If you're able to, if you're not able to, just do it, just send the positive energy. But in Quaker fashion, no words, no round of applause. Let's give our thanks. And that is the raising of the hands and the twisting of the wrists. Oh, that's beautiful. I'm going to keep it right quick so my mind can record it. Thank you. So today I come before you to share aspects of my journey, my testimony. One of my favorite persons in the whole world was my grandmother, Emeritus McCune Thames. Yes, while her body is in the grave, her legacy lives within me. I will forever refer to her in the present tense when I describe her, because she is in me. Born in 1925 and dying in August of 2014, her life inspires me and her lessons are deeply in me on every hour the revelations continue to come. So tonight, I'm going to use where my grandmother and I spent the most time together, on the porch. I'm going to shape this and I'm going to give this as porch conversations. The unusual classroom. On those porch conversations in Gulfport, Mississippi, I relished my grandmother, who was a sharecropper, a domestic, and her friends who were beautiful, plain-working, hard-working people. In their conversations, they were the best storytellers ever. The reason I became an historian is because of two reasons. One, they told good stories, and Jesus did too. And those are the two elements that had shaped me. And so an historian does what? Tell stories. And so in their telling of stories, they would transport me to all types of different worlds. Through my grandmother's friends, Miss Maylee, Miss Ruth, Miss Cornelius, Miss Grace, Miss Louise, my aunties, Anna Ruth, Betty Jean, Anne-Marie, and Murda Spell. This mosaic of voices enriched my life. In their conversations, they went from honey child or what, and I learned the power of language and inflection. By listening to their stories of working for other women, I learned the importance of how to treat people fairly and with dignity. I learned to dislike the meanness of one of my grandmother's employers, who I'm going to talk about later, Miss Doolittle, and appreciate the kindness of another, Miss Marcel Downs. From these porch conversations held by people that I admire, I learned that pedigree is second to character. Hard work is good, and to never succumb to the ideas and opinions of others who want to marginalize. On my grandmother's porch, which was only 5 by 7, there were conversations that ranged from cooking to politics. We enjoyed ourselves by eating watermelon, shedding peas, stripping greens, collards, mustards, or turnips, swatting flies, and watching chitterlings being cleaned. I learned about Martin Luther King, and it's so interesting because if you're Southern, you know they don't say king, they say Kane, Martin Luther King. Suffragist Fannie Lou Hamer, and the murderers of teenagers teenagers Emmett Till and NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers. When the conversations went, beyond gossip and politics and went PG, they told us to get out and get some water or go and play. In one of those porch conversations, I heard a story about a young woman who had lost her parents. When she was told to enter the house of the king, she was told not to tell about her identity and her ethnicity. The king became so fond of her that eventually he made her his queen. Later, there was a decree that ordered the murdering of the queen's ethnic group. When her cousin asked her to go before the king on the community's behalf, the queen replied that she could not enter the presence of the king unless she was summoned. Her cousin asked her, "Yet who knows whether you were made to the kingdom for a time such as this?" Although I never heard purpose, per se, and although I was a child listening to stories, I understood the message that I was made for a time such as this, like Queen Esther. On the porch, which was the unofficial living room, on the parlor, or the parlor for most Southerners, black or white, I learned to be human and to fight for fairness. On my grandmother's porch, she held court. The folks who came to the porch brought their best stories and their best songs. In many ways, when I read, and it really spoke to me, and you're going to hear this during this presentation, when I read Henry David Thoreau's Walden, I understood the premise of a simple life very quickly. When I think about it, I'm so happy that I came of an age with all the awake folks, as David Thoreau talks about, on that porch. This talk does not have a PowerPoint because I want you to consider it to be a porch conversation. And I don't know how many people have PowerPoints on their porches. I'm sure there's probably coming, but not now. And I want you to consider this porch conversation between you and me. I want you to imagine sitting in the chair with pillows and looking at folks in rocking chairs. I'm going to treat this as if it's 3 conversations that's happening at 3 times of the day: morning, evening, and night. I will greet you now with how my grandmother greeted folks as they came to her 5x7 porch. Welcome, 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 welcome to this space. Morning conversation. My cousins and I were all outside on the porch. I'm 8. My cousins range from 5 to 14. The day is already humid. The adults are out cooking breakfast, in the kitchen cooking breakfast. I had to tell them about an experience I had with Mama. Everybody in my family called my grandmother Mama. Doesn't matter what your relationship was to her. And her big sister, who's a hairdresser, a person who played the piano. All of my grandmother's siblings played an instrument. That's a layover from slavery, how they entertained themselves and taught themselves with instruments. The age difference between my grandmother and Aunt Gally was 11 years. I tell them about the time I went to the country, and everything was country when you went past, a certain part of Gulfport, Mississippi. It just became country because they were so country and we were so city. And so what happens is I told them about my grandmother and Aunt Gally and this Doolittle. So here it is. So what happens is we're at my Aunt Gally's house. And so we're all just laughing and talking. I used to love to be around my grandmother and her sisters because they were quite animated. And so what happens is they get together, this and that. I mean, I wanted to walk like them, talk like them. I just wanted to get the groove into them because they were like, my auntie played in the church the piano, but she loved blues really more than she loved spirituals. And so I learned in her shop, about, songs that had double meanings. Like I took my girl to the candy stand and she fell in love with the candy man. I was thinking, when I was a child, I thought as a child. When I became older, I understood what that meant. And so what happens is, I just enjoyed being around them. And so next thing you know, phone rang and my grandmother, what? What? My auntie Gally, yeah, child. Okay, what? So next thing you know, they said a Doolittle was coming over. Now, the Doolittles were a part of a family that owned my family. My family is from Newton, Mississippi. They remained on the plantation or the area in which they worked until my grandmother stayed there until she was 40. So we're talking about, 36. And we're talking about a family that went from slavery roughly into the mid 1960s. In the late 1950s, she stayed and remained on this area, this place. The bulk of my family did in this new town of Newton. And in fact, Newton is named after Newton Doolittle. And so the Washers and the Doolittles own my family. And so in my family, everyone associated the name Doolittle with horribleness. You didn't use the word Satan, you used Doolittle. You didn't use evil, you used Doolittle. If anything bad happened, it was the Doolittles. So everything was Doolittle. Ooh, you just as mean as a Doolittle. You just as bad as a Doolittle. Doolittle meant everything bad. So when I found out that this Doolittle was coming to the house, I got excited because I was a child. So I was like, yeah, we going to get this Doolittle. And so next thing you know, this person comes up. They driving in the car. They drive up to my Aunt Galley's yard. And then out of the car comes this woman who looks all fragile. I said, is that a Doolittle? Because, see, in my head, the Doolittles were always big, powerful, strong. And I see this fragile. And then my grandmama and them go out there helping them. What? Why are you helping the Doolittles? So then they bring the Doolittle in, and they giving her coffee and exchanging niceness. Now, I was on the porch swinging in my great-aunt's porch swing. And in these days, kids were, you were seen when they called up on you. And so what happens is I'm still wondering, gave me a piece of cake, so I was outside just swinging. But I'm still wondering, why they up in there being nice to this Doolittle? So then next thing you know, they exchanging niceness or whatever, and then they gave her a piece of sweet potato pie. Oh, girl, you like this right here. Do you remember this cake? It was a 7-Up cake. They just being so nice and they talking. So next thing you know, the conversation ends when somebody drives back up and they pick up the Doolittle. So I'm just sitting there looking. So finally I couldn't hold it. I said, Mama, Aunt Galley, why were y'all nice to that Doolittle? And they saw it. They saw it, and man, I was upset. And they both bust out laughing. And they just both looked at me, and my Aunt Galley said, Child, we were nice to her to let her know she didn't break us. And at that moment, to show her she didn't break us, when I was a child, I got the message immediately. Don't let anyone discourage your humanity. And how do you treat people, even when they treat you or have treated you badly? As I got older, though, I did understand the impact that the Doolittles had on my family. They limited the economic power, the voting power, the dreams. Cotton fields and dish pans became a place called Field of Dreams. They had to imagine things in their head. So I don't dismiss the power that the Doolittles had over my family. Yet, in that space, my family still managed to pass family traditions, get some land, fell in love, purchased instruments, supported Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee University by sending pennies, even though none of them would even finish high school, elementary school, more along college. So here's that lesson, that when a situation arises, you acknowledge pain, you recognize the injustice, be mindful of the dynamics, but don't internalize and don't carry. Keep your eyes on the prize, my ancestors sung. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on. Done made a vow with the Lord, I shall go, I will go to see what the end's gonna be. I'm gonna stay on the battlefield. I'm gonna stay on the battlefield. I'm gonna stay on the battlefield until I die. They didn't have to go and sit in the school to take a political science class, a philosophy class. They didn't have to create any hashtags about their humanity. When they sat in churches, sung hymns, and danced in juke joints, and enjoyed the company of others that eventually led to children, they were in the moment. They were mindful in their mindfulness. And so when we sort of look at that story and that narrative, staying on the battlefield, it reminds me, again, my grandmother them never heard of Samuel Barclay Beckett, who was a French-Irish novelist, a playwright, a theater director, a poet. But if he went to them and he sat on their porches and he ate their 7-Up cake, and then he said to them, ever try? Ever failed? No matter. Try again. Fell again. Fell better. Ever tried? Ever failed? No matter. Try again. Fail again. Try better. The goal is in the failing that you create, you're still creating legacies. I belong to organizations like the National Council of Negro Women that were built by a woman by the name of Mary McLeod Methune. And what happens is she was a consult. She consulted the president, FDR. And so right now, me in that organization is me living in her legacy of activism. It's nothing wrong with failing, because the goal is not to win. The goal is to create something that someone else can build upon. That's the transformation. One of my favorite books is by, again, Henry David Thoreau, Walden, and he says this. He says, I learned this at least by my experiment, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life he has imagined, he will meet with success unexpected in common hours. We have the Tibetan Buddhist, right? Primi Children, when speaking to Naroba University, she borrowed from Beckett and said it again: fail, fell again, fell better. And then I love what Irish novelist and poet James Joyce wrote in Ulysses. He said, a man of genius makes no mistakes. In his errors, there is discovery. My folks got that. The Black protest tradition got what Jesus said when he says, the poor will always be among you. The poor can be any issue, at any time, at any place, at any space. The Black protest tradition get people to learn and age, grace, and wisdom. And I'm just going to say, because I know that I just have a few more minutes. So what happens is I just want to go on to the story just quickly about Harriet Tubman. One of the things that Harriet Tubman did when she was a child and as a slave, she was beaten and mistreated, but for the most part, she got hit in the head with a weight. And so what happens is for the rest of her life, she would have these fallout spells. Now, this is a woman who would travel 90 miles to her freedom. And then she would constantly go back and get people. But she would really have these spells and she would fall out. But one of the things that she said when she first crossed over into a free state, she said, I looked at my hands and I was the same person now that I was free. There was so much glory over everything. The sun came like gold from the trees, and over the fields, I felt I was in heaven. But then she also said, and I love this part, I had crossed she said, I had crossed the line in which I had been so long dreaming. I was free, but there was no one there to greet me. I was a stranger in a strange land, and my home was down there in the cabin. I was free, and they, talking about her family, were not. I made it up north, but I promised myself, and I said, oh Lord, I said, I ain't got no friend but you. Come to my help, Lord, for I's in trouble. And she would use that as she would go back and forth in her treks with her ailments, this head ailment, as she helped people go into freedom. And I want you to know that this story about Harriet, they called a mentee Tubman. Because for the most part, The transformation had already happened as an individual revelation. And then it went from individual to collective. Lunch conversation. Not everyone was there. Now, everyone was there resting after a Sunday supper of greens, fried chicken, mac and cheese, sweet potato, and cornbread. While sipping on some tea, a neighbor brought up Martin Luther King and how, like Jesus, he became dangerous, so they had to kill him. Folks were saying he didn't have to die. Oh, but the neighbor insisted that he did. I was a second year student at Tougaloo College, which served as like the center for the civil rights movement in the 1960s in Mississippi. After listening to the conversation, I told my grandmother what I thought about it, and I wrote a paper for a history class. I got an A, but I had to defend it because I used the Bible as a source. And so, Mama, I said, Mama, we all have our burning bush moments, don't we? She didn't answer. She said, what you mean? Well, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, right? And you know I had to address him by Reverend Doctor, okay? And so I just grew up in a family and a world that, hey, look, you were going to recognize that because that was hard-earned. So think about it. You know, you have to think about that. If you look at his life, Martin Luther King had money. I told my grandmother, he went to school, went private school, went to Morehouse. He got his master's from Crozier. Then he goes to Boston. He gets his PhD. Then he falls in love. And then he gets married. Then they go down to Montgomery. And that's when he encountered his burning bush. Grandmama said, she smiled at me. And I knew that smile. That means, hey, girl, you want something. And so she said, she smiled, and she said, keep going. I said, see, remember that man sounding like a fiery preacher, you know. And, you know, I mean, even though in the movie, my family didn't go to Fire and Brimstone, but, you know, you have enough movies and people around who came to the porch that you could mimic them. So I started getting up, and I said, you remember that man, Mama? I said, remember that man that when he was a boy, there was a decree that went out that they said they were going to kill him. All the Hebrew boys had to be killed. My grandmama, keep talking now. And I said, what happens is they go there, and his mama put him in a basket, and she put him in, and she put him in the basket on the river. And then they get into the river, and then the Pharaoh's daughter comes up and says, ooh, whose child is this? And then she took the child to be her own. He was raised up in the house of the Pharaoh. But then he saw an injustice. When he saw somebody, a Hebrew, a fellow Hebrew slave being hit. He saw that injustice, and then he killed a man. Remember that, Mama? My mama, keep talking. And I said, and remember, he runs away after he kills the man. And then for 40 years, he was in the wilderness, and then he met somebody, fell in love, and then, you know, he was tending to somebody's sheep. He saw a bush, and that bush was sitting there. It was on fire, but it wasn't burning. Yes, keep talking. And so what happens is, I said, so it didn't burn. And so he walks up to it because now he's amazed that it's not burning, it's not consumed. And then he hears a voice, unfasten your sandals. You are on holy ground. Okay. So he goes, he unfastens his sandals. He gets an assignment. But then in that assignment, he started saying, I don't know about this assignment. See, I don't know about it. Because, see, he had lived 40 years in complacency. So he had lost confidence. And so God let his brother Aaron come along. And Moses goes down in Jewish and Christian histories as the person who led the Israelites out of Egypt. Yet it was a strange thing. He wouldn't go to the promised land because when he was told not to strike a rock, he did. He was worried about other folks and their perception. Now back to King. When he saw his burning bush like Moses, he was a bit reluctant in Montgomery. He was only 26. Yet and still he served as a leader to the Disinherited in 1955 in Montgomery. To me, the Montgomery bus boycott is the most beautiful history in American history. For 11 months, 40,000 people kept it moving. And so what happens is he goes down, and in this story, you have all these Davids taking down Goliath. And in Albany, it didn't go that well from him. And then when he was in jail in 1960, he placed a call, the then Senator JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, called Coretta Scott King. And then, can you imagine that moment, being a man, Alabama, saying, what? This man, a Kennedy, calling me on the phone. And so now Martin Luther King, he goes on after then, and he leads a successful march on Washington. I mean, he's on a roll. I mean, then he gets a Pulitzer Prize. I mean, he's just blowing up the set. And so what happens is, by 1965, he grows in age, grace, and wisdom, because what ended up happening is he starts to critique America. And by 1967, King, whose mind was renewed daily by his experiences in the struggle, he did not conform to the world. And so now the government, even some of his allies, and most certainly his enemies, when he gave his speech, Beyond Vietnam, a time to break silence, Martin Luther King would say, I have lost my friends. And within 1 year of giving that speech, he would be assassinated. Now, I want to say this piece about King. When King was no longer in the box of conformity and expectations, he became expendable to the world, and because of his relationship and understanding, the day before he was murdered, because his mind was renewed and it did not transform to the world, his last speech, and I got to say this quote, he says this, now it doesn't matter now, talking about death. It really doesn't matter what happened. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we started to get on the plane, there were 6 of us. A pilot said over the public address system, we are sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane. And to be sure that all things were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane, they had to check out everything carefully. And then I went to Memphis, and some began to say threats or talks about threats were out there. And what happened to me and what would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We have gotten some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't really matter with me now because I have been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like everybody, I would like to live a long life, he said. Longevity had its place. I am not concerned about that now. I want to do God's will, and he allowed me to go to the mountaintop, and I looked over it, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land, and I am so happy tonight. I worry about nothing. I am not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. His mind was transformed. What King did at his burning bush moment was not worry about his life or going viral or pictures of activism. This speech taps into the Black protest tradition of not fearing death and length when injustice is bound. He came from a renewed place. And so when he said, I may not get there, I don't fear anything, he was at peace. And that's why when you transform your mind and not conform to the world, you're at a stage of peace. Dinner conversation. The conversation happened before I got my doctorate. I got home. I was on the home for the 4th. My grandmother and I was sitting on the porch. Before this conversation, and even still, when I thought of the 4th, I always thought about barbecues and good times. And so I also, as I grew age and wisdom, and so in age, grace, and wisdom, I came to understand, in undergraduate, I learned about a man by the name of Nat Turner, who changed the course of slavery by forming militias, and they ended up forming militias against them and restricting educations for blacks. And what happens is he ended up killing 55 to roughly 65 whites. And so in response, whites killed roughly about 200 people. But I liked Nat Turner because he basically said that the slave was not content. His mind was renewed, and he helped to leave a moment to say, so Nat, in history books, they can't say that there was a happy slave as long as Nat Turner was there. And I also thought about David Walker, who wrote a David Walker's Appeal. And what David Walker basically said, it says, hey, look, how can our condition get worse? How can our condition at work get worse? We are already at the lowest. I thought about Frederick Douglass, who wrote an essay called What to the Slave is the 4th of July. And I love what Frederick Douglass said, and I'm going to read this because I love it so much. He said, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your words of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants, breast, fronted, impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all the religious parades and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes would disgrace a nation of savages. This is not a nation on the earth. There is not a nation on the earth more guilty of practices, more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam all the monarchies and despotisms of all the old world, travel through South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts on the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. I think about the multiracial group. At the time, I thought about it was a group in 1951 that went to the UN and they accused the United States of genocide. Okay, and that was the Congress, Civil Rights Congress. And so when I think of Independence Day, and my grandmother was sitting there, giving this, she was, reciting this in this porch conversation. She starts doing the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal, are endowed by their created with certain inalienable rights. And I said, Mama, Mama, Mama. Now, my grandmother only got a 4th grade education, so I really admire her teacher for teaching them the Declaration of Independence, because it's a radical document. But anyway, so she says, I said, Mama, those words weren't made for you. They were made for white men and only white men only. She said, God not talk through bushes, donkeys, rain from the sky, life and death, and you mean to tell me he can't speak through some prejudiced white folks? White folks ain't got a monopoly on God, favor, happiness, language, or love. Those words may not have been written about me, but they were written for me, for my spirit. I remember that day vividly because it affirmed the humanity of all people. What my grandmother didn't know is that, and I would later on find out, it was a woman by the name of Elizabeth Freeman. And Emily Blank, if you ever get an email from her, you'll see that this is her code name, Ma Bet. So I'm going to give you this background of Ma Bet. Her name is Elizabeth Freeman. And what happens is she heard the words in 1780 from the Massachusetts Declaration. It was like our Declaration of Independence, Constitution. And so what happens is she heard it at a public gathering, and she said, wait now, those words apply to me. So she went, she got a lawyer, and she successfully flew for her freedom in 1780. And on her tombstone, this is what it reads. Elizabeth Freeman, also known as Ma Bet, died on December 28, 1829. Her supposed age was 85 years old. She was born a slave and remained a slave for nearly 30 years. She could neither read nor write, yet in her own sphere she had no superior or equal. She neither wasted time or property. She never violated a trust. She never failed to perform a duty. In every situation of domestic trial, she was the most effective helper and tenderest friend. Good mother, farewell. No group has a monopoly on revelation. There is not a right way, there are just ways. In conclusion, he writes in Walden, moral reform is the effort to throw off sleep. Why is it that men give so poor an account of their day if they have not been slumbering? They are not such poor calculators. If they had not been overcome with drowsiness, they would have performed something. The millions are awake enough for physical labor, but only 1 million is awake for effective intellectual exertion. Only 1 in 100 million to poetic and divine life. To be awake is to be alive. Tapping and renewing your mind daily is to waken your genius daily. This is the way that Quaker worship is so subversive. It allows you to think, to explore your genius, to have your mountaintop moments. And in your individual moments, you empower the collective when action is done. So you didn't conform to the world. As Thoreau said, stay awake. We know people go to work. He actually says, and I really love it, he refers to it as people sleepwalking. They don't even know that they're up, but they're really asleep. They're just sleepwalking. And to awake the mind is to do so through a genius. In my uncommon school called The Porch, I understood Thoreau when he said, I'd rather sit on a pumpkin and have it all to myself than be crowded on a velvet cushion. When you are conforming, you're on that velvet cushion. Tonight I could have presented facts and figures of some system of injustice for alarm. We have learned from Trump and other demagogues how that works. I could have given you damning statistics about injustice. I could have talked about the distractions embodied in the nation's ever-moving politics. But you have to see that in this world, suffering ain't new. What matters is how we cultivate and renew our mind, because the poor will always be with you. We have to heed Micah 6:8, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Even if you're not a believer, it's still talking about justice. One of the things that Paul said in his epistle to the Corinthians, he said, I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. My question to you is, will you plant or water? And in what context and when? Will you concern yourself with failure and not the task at hand? I'm not in the prescriptive business. That's not how I understand Quakerism. So I will end with a query for you to ponder in your individual time. What matters, here's the query, when one has a burning bush experience, how will you respond? When one has a burning bush, unfasten your sandals, you are now on holy ground. How will you respond? How do you renew your mind daily? How do you be subversive and transform? I made a vow with the Lord, I shall go, I will go to see what the end gon' be. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Breaker! Breaker power! Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think now if anyone want to have a quick, because right now we have 2 more minutes before we go into a break to transition to the next. Would anyone like to have any, share any comment? Anyone like to share anything? Yes. Please, wait. Guess what? Okay, I know, not hold on, but I can lead you in a song. And I think it goes to this particular piece. And guess what? We can end out with that. Does anyone else like to say anything? Because we can end with song, and it's a song that I know that everyone hopefully will know. Yes. Oh, yes, and this is being live streamed. Okay. Did anyone else like to have anything for? Yes.
You were fabulous. I was mesmerized. Thank you for sharing your grandmother.
Oh, thank you.
You were fabulous. I was mesmerized. I cried. I was moved. I was transformed. And thank you for sharing your grandmother with us and your beautiful childhood and your beautiful spirit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tonya power. Tonya power.
And yes. Oh, yeah, yes. Thank you.
For me, as a young friend, I don't really get into speakers, but for you, you moved me in a way that really touched me, and I really loved it, and you got me so pumped up, and I love your stories, and I love how they all are great, fantastic, a little bit funny there, but are really nice. But thank you.
Thank you. This is and see how we are encouraging one another. Thank you. Thank you. I know we have to transition with the time, so now let's sing a few pieces of this song. Hopefully everyone knows it, and yes, and of course I don't know if Jonathan is here somewhere. Jonathan, okay, Jonathan, come up, Jonathan. I say this because I was on a committee with Jonathan, and he loved to sing, and he always sings. So come up. And so now we're going to do something in unison. This is community. And so we're going to sing This Little Light of Mine. Okay? All right. So you ready? All right. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, go. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. One more time. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. there's any. Oh, I guess she said drop the mic.